time to get poison crystals for Sage.
7K Dreamer Plays.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be looking at Myth Sage Special Dungeon, but before we go into the team, we're going to look at his skill set first. For his passive, he decreases damage taken by 50% for 6 turns, only 6 turns, so it's okay. Decreases poison resist rate and also decrease recovery rate of all allies by 70%, so your healing is going to be affected. For his first skill, he deals 300 damage to 3 enemies and also has poison chance, and second skill inflicts fixed damage and decreases crit and lethal rate. So this will definitely impact your DPS, and there may be a chance that you will not land crit or lethal attacks, which decreases your damage output. His awakened skill inflicts AoE and deals additional damage to poisoned enemies. So in a way, you do want to have poison resist on your team, but you don't really need to worry too much about that, especially if you have Willful Ring equipped on them. So for this team, I'm using the Velika team. For the Velika team, you need to do some setting up, which is to cast the debuff from Rachel's Phoenix, set up the crit rate for Velika, set up the lethal damage and crit damage from Fenrir, set up the single target damage for Velika, and then finally attack. If you want to play it safe, you can also remove the debuff that Sage is gonna land on you, which is the decrease in crit and lethal rate, in order for you to guarantee that your buffs will work. Because otherwise, no matter how much you buff, if you have that chance of not landing a crit and lethal, then it totally defeats the purpose. So I would say Fenrir's buff is optional because he increases crit damage and lethal damage, so Velika herself is pretty strong. However, if you do have that buff landed with Fenrir, your Velika's damage output is gonna scale up a lot. You're not using Live Streamer Scope here. Of course, you can use Live Streamer Scope instead of Lina, but I decided to use Lina, for the benefit of the majority of the players who may not have Live Streamer Scope at that level. Live Streamer Scope is technically only really good at level 44 due to her passive. Okay, of course she has Lina's buff, even though it's a shorter duration and lesser percentage, but still Live Streamer Scope is a more preferable option. But since we have Fenrir now, Fenrir can replace Live Streamer Scope lethal damage buff. Okay, which is why I decided I might as well use Lina so that majority of players can relate. And as you saw, Velika's bottom skill alone, okay, without even awakening yet, is already dealing a lot of damage. So in that case, all these buffs set up are meant to go together very well. You don't even need her awakened skill, so that's something not to worry too much about. And the timing, it's about 2 minutes. Later on, we'll compare with the Shane team. To be honest, the Shane team, for me, it's about the same, because I think Shane's damage output and cooldown is also a factor to be considered. Over here, I decided to move the accessory that increases damage on magic enemies onto Shane, and basically that's the only change, and I swapped in for Eileen instead. You may also want to consider Sylvia for the Velika team, but I'm not sure who you want to take out at that point. But remember to swap your masteries to physical attack if you are using Shane, and these are my Shane's equipment: double lethal, HP, standard PvE jewels, as well as increased damage on magic for her traits. So without further ado, let's go in and check out Shane. For Shane, you need to do far less setting up. Really, it's just to cast the Rachel Phoenix, and if you like, you can also use Fenrir's top skill as the buff, and then just spam off with Shane. So I do have a question here, and that is whether the guild buffs actually work in special dungeons, because it's been a while. I think you guys also have realized that I've been mentioning it for a few times, that Shane's cooldown is not completely cooled down, even with all the proper setup. If I were to take this setup and use it in guild dungeon, she will definitely be able to use her skill again after 6 counters. And usually that's the case, right? That's the point for a counter taunter. But in special dungeon, it does not work that way. So I'm thinking if guild buffs really actually work. And if it doesn't work, then your 30% crit and lethal rate increases are not present, which means you start off at a very low base crit and lethal rate. And as you can see here, Shane does not land any crit and lethal attacks. So yeah, so that's also a problem. And with cases like that, it will really hinder your run and your timing, because ultimately, she's not gonna do that much. And I don't have a healer here, so that's also another problem. I don't have a cleanser basically. But Shane can transform, and that will cleanse off everything, which is good. And from then on, you really just need to focus on your damage output. Over here, I'm using the buff from Fenrir to buff my crit damage and lethal damage. And then I think with another shot from Shane, she should be able to finish Sage easily. So as you can see here, even with poison resist on my Seek, okay, he still gets poison because poison actually spreads through the team, and that's something very unique about poison. Other debuffs don't really spread through the team. So the timing is about the same. Of course, I think if you were to try yourself, you will realize that maybe Shane could be faster, maybe Velika could be faster. I mean, it really depends on the buffs that you use. For me, I'm going all out on the buffs, so that's why it takes quite a while. And poison crystals, of course, are used for synthesizing your Sage, so you can get one Sage free through the special dungeons, which I think is a very neat thing, and I hope, you know, this kind of system should be in the game. But I know they're not going to do it for every single new hero, but I think it's a really nice thing. Of course, as I mentioned in the previous video, that, you know, they promised 6 copies for free, but you know, there's 3 copies that need to be summoned. So that's the only thing I have against the wording of the way he say it. But you know, besides that, I think at least it's better than spending cash. Okay, now to move on to our hero equipment, we'll start off with the Velika team since I already showed you the Shane. My Velika is actually on crit and lethal in double HP and standard PvE duels, as well as increased awakening gauge. And the accessory is the one that increases damage dealt to magic enemies. For her traits, I've given her increased damage dealt to magic enemies as well, along with a 10% crit rate increase. So as you can see, her crit rate is 42%, and coupled with Lina, that will bring it up to 92%. And then with Fenrir, his lethal buff of 50% coupled with her current 32% will be about 82%. And don't forget, you also have a mastery, so masteries you can swing it either way to give it an extra 10%. So if you swing it to the lethal rate side, then it'll be about, both crit and lethal rate will be 90+%. Okay, if you swing it to the crit side, then you have 100% crit, of course. So it really depends on how you want to go about setting up the Velika. And then for Fenrir, he's currently on my PvP build, so I'm not going to touch him. I'm just going to leave it as he is. He's really just there for the passive anyway, and you know, and if he can land his buff, then that's good. For Rachel, PvE block setup, okay, block armor, block jewels, and defensive jewels, and willful ring as well. For Seek, a very full counter build, 95% counter, counter jewel, counter trait, counter accessory, counter armor. That's something that I want to make sure for my Seek every time I go into a battle. And finally for Lina, also just basically defensive kind of build. Mine has red jewels for increased healing, but healing is not really an issue here, especially since Sage decreases recovery rate, so it doesn't really matter. As long as you have willful ring, I think you're totally fine. She needs to just use one buff anyway. So basically that's all I have for this video. Do let me know what you think of Sage and the dungeon's difficulty. Stay tuned for more, guys. Remember to leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much and see you.